Hello everybody, it's me, GhostCritic, and I must obviously first apologise if you've come here on a Monday to see some comic book reviews. Well, I'm on holiday, as some of you will probably be well aware, and I didn't want to not put any content out this week, so I've been feverishly making some videos to keep you all entertained while I'm away. And it kind of kicks off with this rambling story time of my collecting life. Yes, I am the collector and I am exposed. I am exposing myself, not physically. We're going to go down memory lane. On Wednesday there will be all the answers to your questions that you've been asking me over the last couple of weeks. And then on Friday, if you make it that far, I will be showing you something that I don't think I've ever shown on my YouTube channel. And I think it probably will be interesting to perhaps a few of you out there. So if you're new to my channel and you don't want to miss out on any of those videos, hit the subscribe button, click on that bell, and give this video a big thumbs up. And all the rest of the videos that you might watch, because I like to know that I'm liked. So, as I said, I was thinking of things to put up on my channel for the week away. And I was kind of looking around the room, trying to get inspiration, scratching my head, and then it kind of dawned on me that what I should be talking about is right in front of me. It's right behind me. It's in my bedroom. It's under the bed probably, and that's obviously my comic book collection. But to go a little bit further than that, I wanted to kind of delve into this, I guess you could say, obsession. Some would like to say it's a passion. It's my hobby. But there is a certain obsessive element in the art of collecting. And I feel like it's always been with me throughout my life, and I think that is the case for a lot of people. You start very young, and perhaps you don't know when you're very young what you have, and it disappears. So as you get older, you want to get those things back, and that's where that collecting bug really takes hold. That virus gets into your bloodstream and you can't eradicate it. But the reason why I start collecting things, I haven't a clue. It's not even as though I was kind of surrounded with people that collected things, but then as I was trying to remember about memories and trying to connect the dots, perhaps find a reason as to why I am such a collector now, things started triggering me, and I'm thinking, maybe that's where I got it from. So I'm going to kind of go from decade to decade of my life, and this will show how old I really am. And I know there's a few of you a little bit older than me out there, but I'm going right back to the 70s. The first 10 years of my life, I was born in 1971. All those many years ago. And it was kind of a weird decade for me. I don't remember a great deal about it, because my family, that was just me, mum and dad. I have no brothers and sisters. It seemed to feel like we did move around a lot, and that was mostly down to, I think, my dad's job, who was a chef. And so you went where the work was, and if you were lucky, that job gave you somewhere to live as part of your wages. So as a child, from the years of 1 to 10, you didn't really get much of a say of what you got to keep and then bring to the next house. So I don't really remember having a great deal of things that I wanted to keep and collect, basically because I wasn't allowed. I did remember reading a lot of fantasy stuff. My dad always used to say that I was an avid reader, and apparently I was quite advanced for my age in what I read. This is an extreme, but it was kind of like I wasn't reading like Jack and John. I was probably reading like Enid Blyton when everyone else was reading the kind of Jack and John stuff. So that was my world, and while it felt quite insular, there was obviously a reason for that, because I moved around a lot. I didn't really get to make friends as such, because by the time you got to know these people, I seemed to be whisked away again to the next school. To this day, I don't think I could name one person that I knew in my first primary school. I remember the school vividly. I would love to go back there and see if it's still there and how much it's changed, but couldn't tell you a teacher's name. I couldn't tell you anybody that I used to go to school with. Basically because my mind's going, obviously. As for kind of comics, because there is a bit of a theme obviously going through this about collecting, there were comics around. They weren't mine, so I'm guessing, and it's strange to say because I can't imagine either of them being interested in them, but clearly they are. Bad son. I don't know anything about my long departed parents, but yeah, there were comics there. I don't remember really reading much about them. Treats for me at that time were sweets. I had such a sweet tooth when I was a little boy. And so whenever we'd go out and it was like, do you want a toy, do you want a book, do you want a comic book, I go, no, I want sweets. I know. And that's why my teeth are all dirty and rotten now, because of bad dental hygiene and eating too much sugary food. The only thing I can kind of really think of that I collected, despite the fact that I don't think I realised I was doing it, was the kind of little dinky cars that you used to get. I don't think I had a whole load of them, but unlike most children who would probably be out on the pavement or out in the garden or the backyard playing with them and, you know, crashing them into walls and throwing them over like ramps, no, Mark here would just have them presented very nicely in a nice orderly manner on, say, a bookcase or a mantelpiece to show everyone what lovely things. I used to keep them very, very nice and clean and not scuffed and scratched, and I didn't like anyone touching them. So perhaps all the way back there in the first kind of 10 years of my life, perhaps that's where the germ of that virus of collecting began grabbing a hold on me. So let's move on to the 80s. Now, the 80s for me was a much more of a settled lifestyle, as we moved away from the big bustling city that was Liverpool back in the 70s, and we moved further up north to the Lake District, a small town called Grange over Sands. It was on the coast, it had a prom, it did not have a pier, but it had an outdoor pool, which even in the height of British summer, you can imagine how cold that was, we still used this pool and dived into its icy water because you were a young kid, a budding teenager in the making, and just was wild about being able to run around a big open door kind of pool and just go crazy as a kid. Now, I don't think the book side of me ever disappeared, the reader in me. I was still very heavily entrenched in the kind of fantasy genre, and moving it on to kind of more and more adult, mature, I guess you could say, a reading of the fantasy genre. But and that kind of made the whole kind of openness of the big moors, the big farm expanses of farmland, the big mountains, the hills, the woodlands of the Lake District seemed that much more exciting. And I do remember obviously moving when I was 10 years old, finding it very difficult to kind of fit in as a city boy, I guess you'd say. And so it was very difficult for me to initially to get to have and get friends. So I remember spending a lot of time on my own, but obviously it's kind of the very early 80s where you just kind of threw your kids out on the street, and your mum would go, "Be back before it's dark," and you could go anywhere. And literally I would walk for miles through woodlands. I'd pretend I was some fantasy character, some wizard, some adventurer making his way to some imaginary treasure. But the 80s suddenly changed for me, and the collecting bug came to me in a different angle that was I guess not related to comic books in the slightest, because in the 80s music became my life. I had tapes aplenty. The sweets became tapes, became cassettes. I just remember having a huge box. Literally it was massive, and it was full of blank cassettes that I'd recorded kind of the chart countdown on a Sunday. I'm sure a lot of British people out there will no doubt remember being in front of the tape player on a Sunday evening, recording the chart countdown, but trying to take out the kind of DJ's words in between. You just wanted the start of your favourite songs to the end before they started talking again. You had Top of the Pops on Thursday on TV, and I just remember all these car trips with my mum and dad where we'd go obviously explore the Lake District, and the car would be filled with all kinds of music. You'd have Barry Manilow, you'd have Johnny Cash, you'd have all these hits of the previous decade that my dad was into, from the 70s and the decade before that, the 60s. I'd throw in some hip hop, some Michael Jackson. I was heavily into the kind of electronic music that was coming out of the 80s, so Depeche Mode, Erasure, Spandau Ballet, Duran Duran, Gary Newman, all these musical influences that just filled my whole life. And like I said, it's just like in the 70s and all that stuff I collected. It's all gone, it's all disappeared, it's all been thrown in the bin to make room for other stuff, or it got thrown away at the time because you just didn't know as a child what you actually had there. And it's much like all those cassettes now. Obviously, do I have a cassette player anymore? No. So having all those tapes now would be pointless, but I just remember writing very carefully on the little inlays, the cassette inlays, all the artists' names and the names of the songs, and writing the date of the charts on the edge of the cassette, and it became very detailed. It became very organised, and that's another kind of collector's trait. We love to have things organised, and we all have our own ways of organising things. You know, all these boxes behind me, I just basically do it in alphabetical order, but there'll be people out there who put them perhaps in alphabetical order, but we'll be putting them in publishing houses. So we'll have A through to Z of Marvel, A through to Z of DC, and so forth and so forth. So there again, another indication of that disease within me, that germ growing and growing of being a hard collector. Now, comics were there in the 80s. There was no denying that. I've spoken about it in other videos years ago when we were talking about our comic book history. There were two places in a local town called Lancaster, and one of them, there was a huge fish market, an indoor fish market, but above it on the balcony, there was a balcony that went all the way round, and it sold absolutely everything from curtains to buttons to hoovers to hoover bags, just bric-a-brac stuff. But at the far end, hidden away almost in a corner, there was a guy who sold back issues, comic books. They were just comic books. You didn't know they were back issues. I didn't understand that at that early age, but I do remember going and picking up random comic books. The one kind of genre that kind of stuck with me in my head that I remember collecting, and only because the guy who was selling it all had to ask my dad if it was all right for me to have these, was Marvel horror comics of the 70s. And I just think back now, and I've obviously read them again and seen them, and I just think they're not really that scary. I mean, okay, I probably was about 13 or 14 at the time. Did this conversation between my dad and this comic book seller have to happen? Apparently it did. So comics were gradually getting into my life, much like magazines were. I would hoard magazines. Obviously the music ones. I wasn't so highfalutin that I would be buying things like NME or Melody Maker that came after it. I was more like your smash hits, your number one, the big glosses like The Face, like the long lamented Sky magazine, if anyone in the UK ever remembers that one. And yes, there would be piles of them. I would keep them. Why did I keep these magazines? Again, they're gone. They're in the landfill of heaven. But there was just something about having them all there in order, piled up. And obviously the big thick magazines had the kind of thick edges to them, like the prestige format comic books, and I would make sure they were all lined up, and they were all in month order, and they were all in year order. There is something about collecting and organising that is within me and within probably a lot of you out there, and it's just crazy that this stays with you for so many years. But that was my 80s, that was my year 10 to year 20, and it pretty much all took part in the Lake District. We move on to the 90s, and it was a bit of a weird decade for me because I'd finished school, I'd done sixth form, and then I just kind of fell into a job working at, I guess you'd call it a mini market, a local grocer's store. And I just did not know what I wanted to do with my life. I looked around at everyone and they were all doing the same things. The girls wanted to be hairdressers or child carers. The blokes all wanted to be firemen, kind of a tradesman like a bricklayer or a plumber. and I just did not know what I wanted to do. All I really knew was that I had to get out of this town. It's very nice to go and stay. It's a very picturesque kind of Lake District town, very hilly. I always used to say it was the weirdest place because it was filled with retirement homes. And while I can appreciate that, yes, the sea breeze, you know, the fresh air and all that, wherever you had to get to, there were hills. Even within the town, everything was on a hill. So how these old people got around, I don't know. It has to be really the worst place to retire to. But it obviously was very quiet. It was very rural in some respects. And I was bored. Oh, I was bored. So I had this idea that I wanted to be an actor. And so I went off for 6 years of my life pretending that I wanted to be an actor. Really just to get out of having to work. Now obviously being a student, money is tight, so collecting becomes a very small part of your life. However, it still seeped in, because while there was parties, there were clubs to go to, beer to drink, drugs to take, identities to find, I found myself being drawn into the world of movies and TV. And that's, I guess, where the next stage came for collecting. And that was with video cassettes. Again, they're all gone, but I had stacks of them. Everyone wanted to come round to our student house because I had the best video collection. I mean, a great majority of them, I just recorded them off the TV. I used to record TV shows. I had all the X-Files up to that point. I had Twin Peaks. What other crazy shows did I have? There were so many movies, the big 80s blockbusters that had come before that everyone still wanted to reminisce and enjoy. And so we'd have movie nights and the like. But yes, that then became the 90s. But really nothing much happened there for me. I was a little bit lost in what I wanted to do with my life. From when I seem to be moving further and further up north, from being a Liverpool city boy to this kind of small local town in the Lake District, to moving up even further to a place called Carlisle, where I initially went to pretend to be an actor for 2 years, and then decided to move all the way to where I am now and where I've stayed since, in Northampton, to come and do a degree in acting. Which again, it was just an excuse not to work, not to have to get a job, and I failed miserably at all of it, in the sense that I never passed. I never passed my degree, basically because I never used to go, for the majority of it, but just that it really was just a means to an end. So again, I'm trying to think, comic books at this particular point, they weren't there really anymore. I kind of remember a comic book store in Carlisle that I used to go in occasionally, but again, student life, not much money, so it wasn't like I was mining their back issue boxes or had a monthly pull list or anything like that. There would have been no way I could have afforded things like that. But I think I must have accumulated some, but much like all the records and the tapes that I'd accumulated back in the 80s, they all started dwindling because basically I was selling them to stay as a student, to not have to get a job. And while I think about it now, it does break my heart. It really does, because I just wonder what kind of gems and rarities that I would still have now, that would have perhaps many of you all drooling. Like I say, it just kind of, it doesn't bear thinking about. It really doesn't. So that kind of leads me on to the end of my 30s. The student life had ended. There was really nowhere else for me to go. So I really had to bite the bullet, find myself a job, which led us to the 2000s. So yes, the new millennium had come. I was in my 30s. I'm going to kind of make this the final part of the video, so 30s up till my ripe old age now. I will be 47 tomorrow. I'm old. I think by the time the 30s had come, comic books certainly had started a proper hold on me, certainly in the sense that or what you've seen what you can partially see behind me, what you see on the shelves, what you don't really see over there on the other shelves, what you don't see in my bedroom, is the accumulation of let's see, 18 odd years of comic book collecting, because for some reason I do not want to let go of these things. Maybe it's because I've had to, for whatever reason, whether it's, you know, it's not my decision because I'm too young, whether it's just pure not ignorance, but I'm going to use the word ignorance, in not knowing what I have, and really knowing their worth in future years. You know, if you were a speculator and could go back in time, how much stuff would you hoard and accumulate? Would just be ridiculous. And I kind of lost my train of thought there. But it's basically just now, and yes, obviously the financial aspect of it, not having much money as a student, I just basically had to sell everything. But now obviously I'm in a job, I'm kind of well paid, some people may think. I have disposable income, and you know, I am my own man, I have my own home, I can do with it what I want, I can fill it with what I want, and it can damn well stay there if I want. Comics just will not leave my life. It will be a grey, dark, black day when it comes to me having to get rid of, for whatever reason, all this. And I don't know why I don't want to let them go. Perhaps it's that nostalgic reason. These are moments in time. You know, there are books that I can pick out and remember, have a memory about them. But I can do that about music though. But I guess it's the physicality of that comic book rather than... With music, it's not so much the package it comes in, like a cassette, a CD, or whatever. It's the atmosphere that music lends to. And obviously, you know, you say, well, Mark, you've got all this money now. What happened to, you know, the toy cars? What happened to the DVD collection? What happened to the CDs? All that music? Well, obviously, technology has changed. We now have Spotify, we now have iTunes, we now have Amazon Prime, we now have Netflix. I don't feel the need to surround myself with those movies or that music because they're so easily on demand within a laptop, within my TV screen, and I don't need to hoard them all around and have them up, stacked up to the ceiling. Yes, I know, these boxes are getting high and they're getting to the ceiling. And it's strange because as hard as digital comics are trying to become the new medium for comics, that hasn't really grabbed me, or I guess a lot of people. For some reason, you have to hold a comic, you have to be able to smell a comic, and whenever you walk into a comic book store, you could be blindfolded, someone could walk you in, you would automatically know you're in a comic book because that has that particular smell. And it might be a musty old smell, but it's still that smell of comics that you associate with it. And it's just the physicality of a single issue, or having a big kind of omnibus book flat out on your knees reading the page, which just does not in any way translate onto a tablet, a laptop. You just don't get the same feeling from that. So comics certainly are the kind of, well, I hope they are the pinnacle of my collecting life. I don't know if there is anything else to come. Perhaps there is, just hold that thought. But it has well and truly taken over. It's in my bloodstream, it's in my veins. There are no amount of operations, medicines, herbal remedies that are ever going to eradicate the collector within me. And at this point in my life seems to be comic books, and they will forever stay. However, there is something that's trying very hard to creep into my collecting life, and they look a little bit like this. And if you want to see more of them, stay tuned throughout the week. Thank you for listening to me ramble on about my collecting life. As I said, I don't know where it's come from. It's kind of sad. It's a sad memory to have, and I just remembered I wasn't going to put it in, but I will anyway. I kind of remember. Well, it's not a kind of. I do remember when my mother died, and obviously I had to clear out the home that she lived in. I just opened drawers. I opened cupboards. I opened bags that were hanging in the garage or in the shed. Literally everywhere. I know this is a strange thing to collect, and perhaps it wasn't intentional, but the range of it seemed to make it feel like it was. But there were no amount of pens, pencils, felt tips, crayons of all shapes and sizes, colours, thicknesses, some with, toys hanging off the end, some of them sprinkled with glitter, some of them like calligraphy sets, all manner of writing instruments I found. And along with those, which kind of goes with it, but endless amounts of notepads. Now, whether that's just kind of a habit, a pen is a pen. How how expensive are pens these days? There probably are some very expensive pens, but they were everywhere. I must have filled literally bin bags, not shopping bags, but bin bags of pens, of pencils, of crayons, and all sorts of things like that. And I wonder if that is an element of collecting that I might have got from my mum. My dad, generally, I don't really think he was a collector as such. The most I think that would ever veer in that direction was that he kind of bought a great many cookery books, but I just put that down to the fact that he was a chef throughout his life. He was looking for inspiration for new recipes, for things to put on menus in the restaurants he ran. But there were a lot of cookery books as well, of all decades, going way, way, way back to, you know, the 40s and 50s, right up till, you know, before he died. So perhaps it's genetic. Perhaps it is your thing. For my mum, it was writing implements, and for my dad, it was pictures of delicious food with all their ingredients written underneath it. For me, it's the funny pages. It's those funny books, and they will be with me for many, many more years. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed my little tale of my collecting history. Let me know down in the comments section what were some of your earliest memories of collecting. I'd love to hear those. Until next time, thank you for listening. Bye bye.